You know, it's funny. I was reading about this Jamaican food truck the other day in Stockholm, of all
Oh,
places.
yeah.
Yeah, called Yardie Jamaican Cuisine. And it made me stop and think, Yardie,
Right.
it's a word you hear, kind of floats around, but what's the actual story? And well, guess what? That's exactly what one of you asked us to look into this time.
Perfect timing then.
So welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take your questions, grab the source material today. It's a pretty detailed Wikipedia page, and really try to get under the skin of the topic for you.
hmm
Our mission today, to unpack Yardie, all the layers, the history, because it feels like a word that's carrying a lot, you know?
It definitely does.
Starts simple enough in Jamaica. Patois just means home, basically. But then somehow it gets really tangled up with gangs. How does that happen? That's what we want to figure out.
Yeah, and it's that exact journey, isn't it? From something
Yeah.
familiar like home to, well, something linked with crime. That's what makes it so interesting to explore.
So where do we start? Jamaica.
Let's start right there, just like the Wikipedia info does.
Yeah.
In patois, yeah, yard is home.
Yeah.
Your house, your place. Or even your general area, your turf.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is this potential link to the government yards in Kingston.
Government yards. What were they?
Basically, public housing projects,
Mm-hmm.
often these two-story concrete buildings built for lower-income folks.
Right.
You gotta imagine, these places would have been packed,
Mm-hmm.
really dense, but also like the absolute center of life for
Mhm.
people there, real community hubs.
Okay. So central points for the community. But the source material, it also mentions issues,
Hmm.
right? Overcrowding,
Yeah,
poverty.
those became serious problems. And, where you have those kinds of intense pressures,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, sometimes crime can find a way in.
Yeah.
And the Wikipedia entry points to political stuff too. Corruption, local politicians kind of having sway in these areas.
So the yard this place meant for community, it starts to get complicated. It becomes a place where other tougher things are happening too.
Pretty much. It sounds like these government yards, facing all that pressure, saw crime go up. Drug problems, violence.
And the political angle, you mentioned politicians.
Yeah, this idea of political clientelism. Politicians basically building loyalty, maybe using local groups, sometimes even gangs, for things like intimidation. Or worse, violence against rivals.
Wow.
So
No.
yard isn't just where you live anymore. It gets caught up in these darker currents.
Mhm.
And remember, in patois, yard can also mean territory.
Ah, right. Territory.
So it's not a massive leap, is it? Groups coming out of these specific yards start talking about their claimed territory using the same word.
Okay, so the word itself starts to shift. Home, then territory. And territory gets linked to these emerging criminal groups. The Wikipedia page mentions other terms popping up too, like posse and crew.
Yeah, as these groups got more involved in crime.
And it says Yardies is more a UK thing, while posse is used more in North America for similar groups with Jamaican origins.
That's a really key distinction, the geography.
Why the split, do we know?
Well, let's zoom out a bit. The 70s and 80s in Jamaica, according to the source, were pretty turbulent politically.
Right.
And this is when politically linked organized crime really seems to take root. Gangs, often led by figures called dons.
Dons, like the mafia term.
Yeah, similar idea in terms of leadership structure, I suppose.
Yeah.
And these groups weren't just doing political dirty work. They got into drug trafficking, racketeering.
So branching out into pure crime.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Wikipedia page actually points to a couple of books here, Ruthless and Born Fi Dead, that apparently go deep into these connections.
Okay.
And then in the 80s, government funding apparently gets cut back. So these gangs, maybe initially tied to politics, they have to find other ways to make money.
Like drug trafficking.
Increasingly so, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Jamaican government starts cracking down.
Trying to get a handle on it.
Right. But an unintended consequence, according to the source, is that some gang members actually emigrate. They leave Jamaica,
Where do they go?
UK, US, Canada, looking for new opportunities, basically.
And this timing lines up with.
It lines up with the rise of the crack cocaine market in places like the UK and North America.
Huh. So sadly, it seems some of these individuals arriving from Jamaica got heavily involved in that trade. Drugs, other illegal stuff in their new homes.
That seems to be the picture painted by the source material, yes.
Okay, let's focus on the UK then, because that's where Yardie as a term seems to really stick, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. The source mentions the British Nationality Act from way back in '48, which made it easier for people from the Commonwealth, including Jamaica, to come to the UK.
Right.
And even then, sometimes Jamaicans were called Yardies, just meaning from Jamaica, from backyard. Fairly neutral term initially.
This means from home.
Pretty much. But then you get more immigration in the 80s, coinciding with some of this gang activity we talked about.
And that's when it changes.
That's when terms like Yardie culture and Yardie gangs really start appearing in British society, and especially in the media, linked to areas in London like Brixton, Harleston, Tottenham.
So how does that happen? How does person from Jamaica become so strongly linked specifically to crime in the UK?
It seems a lot of it was driven by media reporting, according to the Wikipedia info. Crime stories in London's black communities often use labels like Yardie gang or Yardie gun violence.
Okay.
And it wasn't just London. The page notes reports of Yardie activity elsewhere in the UK too, even linked to things like county lines drug running more recently.
So it becomes a kind of shorthand for a specific type of crime linked to a specific origin.
It really looks that way. A stark example of how a word's meaning can just get completely reshaped by context and, well, by media usage.
But interestingly, the Wikipedia entry also says that British police are often, hesitant to officially call these groups organized crime.
Yeah, that's a significant point.
Why is hesitation?
Well, the thinking seems to be that maybe they lack that rigid top-down structure you often associate with, say, traditional mafia families.
More loose-knit.
Perhaps. The source suggests affiliations might be more fluid, less formal. And this ties into something else mentioned, a concern from academics.
What's that?
That there might be a tendency to just slap the Yardie label on almost any black British crime, potentially unfairly.
So it could be reinforcing stereotypes, oversimplifying things.
That's the concern raised, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you question how accurate and how helpful these broad labels really are.
Even though there were specific police operations, wasn't it Operation Trident in London, aimed at gun crime associated with the term?
Yes, Operation Trident is mentioned as a response to that specific issue. But alongside that, there's also this counter-viewpoint noted that maybe the actual reach and influence of quote-unquote Yardies gets overstated sometimes.
So it's complex, the label is powerful, maybe even more powerful than the reality sometimes.
That's certainly a perspective highlighted in the source material.
Okay, let's shift slightly. Pop culture, the term Yardie shows up a lot there too, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. The Wikipedia page lists loads of examples. Films, TV shows.
Like what?
Well, classics like The Harder They Come, even James Bond's Live and Let Die had characters kind of fitting the mold. Then more action stuff like Marked for Death, Predator 2.
Right, I remember those.
Rumble in the Bronx, Belly. More recently, things like Gangs of London. Even the Bob Marley film, One Love, apparently touches on it.
And video games too.
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto games often feature Yardie gangs, the Getaway series as well. And there's a well-known novel by Victor Headley actually called Yardie.
So these portrayals, they must have a huge impact on how people see the term, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They contribute massively to the public perception. And often, as the source suggests, the characters are, well, violent criminals.
Which reinforces the negative meaning.
Exactly. Especially in the UK context we talked about. It feeds into that association. Though, maybe a novel like Headley's offers a different, perhaps more nuanced take compared to some blockbuster movie portrayals.
Right, different levels of depth, potentially. The source also quickly mentions related slang, Jamaican posse, rude boy, bad man.
Yeah, just briefly mentioning those related terms, which kind of adds a bit more cultural context around it all.
Okay, so bringing this all together then, if we had to summarize the journey of Yardie.
I think the main takeaway, based on this Wikipedia deep dive, is just how complex and layered it is.
Yeah.
It started totally innocently. Just a word for Jamaicans, connected to yard, meaning home. Simple.
But it evolved.
It really did.
Yeah.
It became heavily associated with Jamaican gangs, crime, particularly in the UK context. So context is absolutely everything when you hear that word.
You can't just assume one meaning.
Definitely not. It's gone from meaning home to often meaning something much darker, especially depending on where you are and who's saying it.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely.
About how language works, how it shifts, and how a word can pick up so much baggage, so many negative connotations.
And maybe that's the final thought to leave people with. Just consider how language, and especially how media uses language, shapes how we see whole groups of people. Think about the power of these labels, like Yardie. What are the real, complex human stories hidden behind a simple, often stereotyped word?
Does the label obscure more than it reveals?
That's a great question to ponder. Hopefully, this dive has maybe peeled back some of those layers, given a more nuanced view of a word with a really complicated past and present, and maybe encourages us all to think a bit more critically about how these terms land and what they truly represent.